So welcome everyone to the session on courageous forgiveness, freeing the heart from the past. So I'm kind of continuing the series on trauma, dealing with trauma and anxiety with this talk. And it kind of occurred to me during the week how important forgiveness was in terms of healing from trauma, and how difficult a topic it can be for anybody in working with, particularly with past hurts, harmful behavior from the past. And it sort of came up for me as I noticed a lot of resentments that would surface during my practice and during the day. And teacher Matthew told me that an important part of this practice is to work through those resentments, to kind of clear the decks, so to speak, to then allow the practice to flourish in that more open space. So I really did start to look at what was fueling my resentments and the sort of habitual thoughts and patterns that would arise around resentments, and really started to look at some of the rage and hate that was still present and lingering. So as the Buddha said, hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love alone is healed. This is an ancient and eternal law. So that's that quote from the Buddha really struck me as, yeah, okay, there's healing that needs to happen here. Hatred will never cease by hatred, but by love alone is healed. And he used the word healed there. So I think he's really pointing to that aspect of the practice that is healing. So what I discovered was that without forgiveness, I was shackled to the past. It was like there was a chain connecting me to the past. We find that when someone else does us harm, we're connected to that mistreatment, like a chain. We're kind of caught in the trauma and the pain of the past, and really tethered to it in so many ways. And this happens in societies as well. Humanity needs to learn forgiveness as well, to end the kind of cycles of vengeance and violence that so many societies find themselves in. I want to play a short video clip by Nadia Bolz-Weber. She's not a Buddhist teacher, but full of wisdom, and I think you'll enjoy and find this helpful.
I really believe that when someone else does us harm, we're connected to that mistreatment like a chain. Because forgiveness is nothing less than an act of fidelity to an evil combating campaign. So it's not an act of niceness. It's not being a doormat. It really, to me, is more badass than that. Maybe retaliation or holding on to anger about the harm done to me doesn't actually combat evil. Maybe it feeds it. Because in the end, if we're not careful, we can actually absorb the worst of our enemy, and on some level, even start to become them. So what if forgiveness, rather than being like a pansy way of saying it's okay, is actually a way of wielding bolt cutters and snapping the chain that links us? Like it is saying, what you did was so not okay that I refuse to be connected to it anymore. Forgiveness is about being a freedom fighter. And free people are dangerous people. Free people aren't controlled by the past. Free people laugh more than others. Free people see beauty where others do not. Free people are not easily offended. Free people are unafraid to speak truth to stupid. Free people are not chained to resentments. That's worth fighting for. There really is a light that shines in the darkness, and that the darkness cannot, will not, shall not overcome it.
It's powerful. A powerful short sermon there, packed with so much, really. It kind of sums up what I might want to say in half an hour, 45 minutes. I noticed if you read the comments under that, under Nadia's that talk, lots of people who experienced trauma are chiming in with comments saying that they go in and they actually listen to that video over and over again, and they listen to it when they're feeling that the chained to that resentment or chained to that the past hurt. So it's it's like the practice of compassion or loving kindness, where forgiveness doesn't deny or suppress the truth of suffering. We're not talking about, saying, as she says, Nadia said, it's not saying that it's okay. It's not denying what happened. It's and it's not weak. It takes courage to forgive, to recognize and forgive the hurt. That's why I called the talk Courageous Forgiveness, because I really do think it's a courageous act. And as she said, it's not about being nice. It's would she say it's badass? It's like using bolt cutters. I like that image, using bolt cutters to snap the chain that links us to the past. Like, it's a wonderful image of just snapping that chain. Yeah, what you did is not okay. Is so not okay that I refuse to be connected to it anymore. You can tell I've listened to this talk a lot of times. We can be free from the past. We're free people that are not chained to resentment. So I invite you, if you connected with that in some way, to take another view of that video. It's just entitled "Forgive Assholes." If you put that in YouTube, you'll get. I don't think there's too many YouTube videos with that title. You'll probably. And her name's Nadia. She's got quite a few different videos on YouTube. Okay, so the whole idea that forgiveness isn't about being nice, I think, is important. It's not like it's and we've got that image, and I don't know where it comes from, that it's this thing nice people do. And I think sometimes we think, well, the nice thing to do in this case would be, to forgive. And sometimes we think we should forgive because it's the nice thing to do. And this is really taking kind of a different approach to it. And the Buddha, when he talked about forgiveness, spoke about it in different ways. One way he talked about it was, forgiveness is something we do to cut ourselves from resentments with the past. So it helps us draw our minds out of being kind of cycling through with past thoughts of the past. And that's how many insight meditation or Theravadan teachers will talk about it. So Jack Kornfield speaks about it as something that we do to kind of to two things really, to free ourselves from the past, but also to recognize that we've also we also have to forgive ourselves for things that we've done to others. Right, so it's kind of, it works in both ways. It's, we're forgiving ourselves at the same time we're forgiving others. That it's kind of this common humanity that we all do things that hurt others. I mean, of course, there's extremes there that, as well. That that's where you really get a chain to the past that can seem like it's, you know, it's almost too much to forgive for deep hurts. Trying to find, yeah, I'm going to play Jack, talk by Jack. And again, another short video clip.
So here's a little bit about the architecture of forgiveness as we sort of wend our way toward doing the practice of forgiveness. First, some basic understandings. Forgiveness does not mean that we condone what happened in the past. It's not forgive and forget. In fact, forgiveness might also include, quite understandably, the resolve to never let this happen again. I will do everything in my power to protect myself or protect others to make sure this doesn't happen again. And forgiveness doesn't mean you have to speak to or relate to a person who betrayed you necessarily. It's not about them. It doesn't condone it. It can stand up for justice and say no more. And it's not sentimental or quick. You can't paper things over, you know, and smile and say, I forgive. It is a deep process of the heart. And in the process, you need to honor the betrayal of yourself or others, the grief, the anger, the hurt, the fear, and it can take a long time. Sometimes when you do forgiveness practice, you realize I'm never going to forgive that person, you know, and never takes a while, basically. You'll see. Or forgiving yourself, which in some cases can be equally long and difficult. This great forgivenesses of things that we've done or small ones, and the kind of epidemic of self-hatred and criticism in this country that I see all the time from people who come to meditate. This from Florida Scott Maxwell, the author, she writes, no matter how old a mother is, she watches her middle-aged children for signs of improvement, right? And there's some way in which we've internalized this, and we spend our life judging ourselves. And some of us are such harsh judges, they wouldn't hire you in a civilized society. There is such a thing. You'd have to go work for Idi Amin in Uganda, and they'd say, yeah, right, put her on the bench, you know, she knows how to judge, right? So it's not sentimental. It's actually a deep work of the heart that purifies and releases and somehow permits us to love and be free. And sometimes it's a kind of tearing of the closeness of the heart. The Lakota Sioux they write, they say that grief, which is a part of the forgiveness, because it's all the loss that things didn't work out the way you wanted. Somebody said forgiveness means giving up all hope of a better past, right? It's done. It's the way that it was. But with it, there's loss and there's grief. For the Lakota Sioux, grief was valued. It brought a person closer to the gods. For when a person had suffered great loss and was grieving, they were considered the most wakan, the most holy. And their prayers were believed to be especially powerful, and others would ask them to pray on their behalf. So sometimes it's the things that make us vulnerable, that tear the heart open, that actually bring us back most fully to what matters, to love, to life. That our vulnerability becomes a place that our hearts depend on for staying alive and open, even when we're hurt. Does this make sense to you? That we need to respect this. So forgiveness isn't sentimental. It's not quick. It can take a long time. It's not a papering over. It's not condoning. It's also not for anybody else. It's like the two ex-prisoners of war, one who says to the other, "Have you forgiven your captors yet?" And the second one says, "No, never." And the first one then looks and says, "Well, they still have you in prison then, don't they?" And I remember sitting with the Dalai Lama and some Tibetan nuns who'd gotten out of 7, 8, 9 years of imprisonment and torture, together with a meeting that I was running of ex-prisoners from prisons all across the USA who'd been using meditation, contemplative practices, mindfulness, compassion, and so forth to change their lives. And when they got out, this was a room, here's these guys, 25 years in Texas State Prison, 18 years in Ohio in a maximum security, just out. And these people sitting with the Dalai Lama and with these little nuns who were in prison when they were teenagers for saying their prayers out loud. And the nuns, somebody said, "Were you ever afraid?" And they said, "Oh yes, we were terribly afraid. And what we were afraid of is that we would end up hating our guards, that we would lose our compassion. That's the thing that we most feared." And they sat there, these sweet young nuns. And I remember this one guy who'd been in prison for, 18 years in Ohio saying, "I seen some brave folks in my day, and I ain't never seen anything like you young ladies." It was really amazing.
Yeah, so that's part of a longer workshop that Jack did on forgiveness. So part of this practice is sort of the recognizing the human shared humanity of it, that we've all betrayed and harmed others, just as we have knowingly or unknowingly been harmed by people. So that's why we the forgiveness meditation is about forgiving ourselves and for the hurt that we've put into the world, as well as the hurt that we've received. And we're extending and receiving forgiveness. It is essential for our redemption from the past. Right? Jack's saying forgive does not mean to condone actions taken by others. And we can dedicate ourselves to making sure that it never happens again. But without forgiveness, the world can't be released from the sorrows of the past. I think that's why Matthew really pointed out to do this kind of practice. He recommended forgiveness and gratitude practices to really release from and they can be quite subtle sorrows or resentments from the past. That the quote that I came across was a quote by Lily Tomlin. I don't know if people remember Lily Tomlin, character, actress. Forgiveness means giving up all hope for a better past forgiveness is a way to move on. At least that quote's been attributed to her. Forgiveness means giving up all hope for a better past. Forgiveness is a way to move on. And that's really how insight meditation teachers speak about forgiveness. It's something that we do for our own mental health, is a way to kind of let go of the pain that we're carrying. And for people with a traumatic past, this can be very, very freeing. Letting go of the sorrows of the past, the resentments of the past can be very freeing at a visceral level. It can shift how we relate to many things in our lives. So we can go through life holding on to hatred or resentment from the past, right? But those that harmed us are merrily on vacation or just going on with their lives. We're the ones still suffering from holding on to that, and we also begin to see that it's painful to hold on to it. It's painful to hate, and we recognize that holding on to that can never heal our pain. So it's in letting go of those resentments and sorrows of the past that we find relief. Mother Teresa, as a quote attributed to her, is, "If we really want to love, we must learn how to forgive." So when we let go of those sorrows of the past, the resentments of the past, we find relief in our heart, and it becomes really an opening. The heart opens more and more to love, and I think that's really what Mother Teresa is pointing to there. If we really want to love, we must learn to forgive. And in my experience, it's a practice that gets deeper and deeper. There's layers. So you may start with fairly traumatic sorrows from the past, sufferings from the past, hurts, and it layers down. It's more subtler and subtler layers of forgiveness. You start to see how there's I've discovered that fairly tiny is not the word. What would almost sound inconsequential if I said them to you, have created ripples of resentment, the ripples of holding on to a ripple of a past. That story that Jack told is the well-known Tibetan Buddhist story. Where I'll repeat it, two monks encounter each other after some years after being released from prison where they'd been tortured. And one monk said, "Have you forgiven your torturers?" And the other one says, "I will never forgive them, never." And the other monk replies, "Well, I guess they still have you in prison, don't they?" So that's really pointing to how you kind of remain imprisoned by holding on to that hatred, to those resentments. Philip Moffat says, "Forgiveness is a practice about liberating your own feelings and finding meaning in the world of life's events. In the worst of life." Let me start over. Forgiveness practice is about liberating your own feelings and finding meaning in the worst of life's events. You practice forgiveness to be free of the inner violence of your rage and you do not abandon the pursuit of right action. So pointing to similar things that Jack doesn't condone it. In fact, it may free you up to make sure that it never happens again to yourself or to others. So there's a real strength and courageousness to forgiveness. I hope you're seeing that it's not soft or it's not a pansy act, is the word Nadia used. Forgive, we can actually announce, never again will I allow these things to happen. We can resolve to liberate the past and not carry the hatred and resentment in our hearts. Now, for some things, for deep sorrows, it may take a long time. Right? It may not be quick. So it's a process of opening. And we may just begin with the intention to approach our deepest sorrows in this way. To open to the idea, set the intention to do it, and then to see what unfolds. Right? We can begin slowly, titrate it, so to speak. And we might begin to see how all events, whether they're pleasant, awful, sorrowful, all rise out of causes and conditions and are interdependent. So, we have good things in life that happen to us and bad things that happen to innocent people. So it can point you also towards some of the not self teachings. Good to see that our own life is at its root impersonal. And we don't become identified and imprisoned by the actions of others, no matter how awful or wounding they might be. I'm kind of rereading a book by Adyashanti. The book's called Resurrecting Jesus. And he basically goes through and talks about how, based on the actions and kind of direct quotes from Jesus, not so much what was written about him, although he does quote some of the disciples, Matthew and Thomas in particular. He looks at how Jesus lived a non-duality. It's not the idea of not self. Just a second. Somebody's in the waiting room. Okay. So I'm going to read a rather long quote, and then I'll open it up for some questions from Adyashanti on forgiveness. Forgiveness comes from a deep, open-hearted state of compassion. Really, it comes from our spiritual essence, which I call divine being, because from our spiritual essence, there is an understanding of what suffering is all about. From the heart of divine being, what we realize is that everything that causes us pain and sorrow is ultimately born from misunderstanding. It is a type of illusion. When Jesus says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," this is what he's pointing to. When people are in a state of spiritual clarity, an inner state of psychological, emotional, and spiritual unity, then by the very nature of that unity, they don't act out of ignorance. Ignorance is simply a misunderstanding of the fundamental reality of what we truly are. When we lose consciousness of our deepest self, our deepest being as divine being itself, then in a sense we go unconscious. Part of us goes to sleep, you might say. Then we are prone to illusion. We misunderstand things. We think if someone insults us, for example, that we need to respond with anger. We forget that they're just expressing their own inner conflict, their own inner division, which is ultimately based on misunderstanding. The very root of sin, to use Jesus' language, is something that can be forgiven. It's forgivable because it's an unconscious act, a result of being spiritually asleep. We can't be blamed for being unconscious, for acting out of unconsciousness, even for feeling the effects of our own unconsciousness within our psychology. So in many ways, forgiveness is about being okay with our humanness and the truth of that, and knowing that all suffering and harmful behavior comes out of a misperception of reality and of our true nature. It's really what Ajja is pointing to there. So I've kind of given you two lenses to view forgiveness. It's a lens of, it cuts the chains from the past. And so we do it for our own mental health. And forgiveness is really pointing to how when we misunderstand things, we misperceive reality of what we truly are, that hurtful behavior occurs. This is human. We're unconscious, so to speak. And Ajja points to when Jesus said, he's basically nailed to a cross, ready, dying. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. He's pointing towards that unconsciousness of the people that are torturing him in that instance. Yeah, that's all I've got. Open it up to any questions or comments about that talk or anything else that's coming up for people.